Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I am putting on my clock so that I will be sure and keep up with the time. So it's great to be with everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. If you can hear me all right, please put in the chat that you can hear me. I would appreciate that. Um, these are actually fairly new. Oh, great. Thank you, Lynn. These are fairly new AirPods. And so luckily I do have a Mac, so it works well. Okay. So great. I'm glad. Thank you, Yvonne and Mary Jo and Jeffrey. And great. Everybody's interactive. I appreciate that. You should be able to see on your screen communication skills for library staff. Again, I'm Dr. Curtis Rogers. And thank you so much to the Tampa Bay Library Consortium for inviting me to do this presentation. And hopefully it's the first of many. In fact, I was just talking to Vicki before we were getting started about doing something on customer service, because there's always issues with customer service that we can try to figure out and learn from one another. So one thing that I would really like for you to do in the chat, and by the way, this is going to be a very interactive session. I will ask you some questions and we can discuss a lot of your kinds of responses. But I like to always do some virtual networking before we get started. I think it's great to let everyone know and pay attention in the chat of who everyone is and where you're from. So if your name isn't clearly showing, then if you would add your name to your description, but just go ahead and put in the library name and your job title. And that way everyone around can kind of make connections, because there might be someone else attending the session who you actually know or who you want to get to know, depending on their job title. So go ahead and put the name of your library and your job title. And see, we've got a few people already starting to do that. If you would like to share your LinkedIn link, I think LinkedIn is one of those great professional networking social media tools. And I also know that we have a mix of academic and public library folks, which I think is great, because I definitely think that we can learn from one another on a number of different things. So, okay, I see people are putting in their job title. So we've got somebody in Fort Myers. There's Hernando, Gulfport, Lake Wales. Great. So while you are all putting in your job titles and name of your library, I will go ahead and continue through a little bit of the overview of what we're going to be discussing. Of course, this is communication skills for library staff, and I'm going to be talking about communication and networking skills. And in that, what I think is important are active listening techniques. So we'll go through some of those. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on personality types. I know a lot of times people tend to glaze over when it comes to personality types. I'll use myself as an example, and we'll talk about a few specific personality type tests that you can take that I think cover a lot of really interesting things about how our personality affects our communication skills. So it's all folding into how we communicate with one another. We'll also talk about communication and meeting dynamics. I actually offer a separate session on meeting facilitation skills. So that's maybe something we can do later. And I also have a list of some additional resources, and I will plan for some time at the end for Q&A. One of the things about this session, and I do tend to really pay attention to the chat box. So if there is a question that you have as we are going through the slides and I'm talking, I will kind of periodically take a look over at the chat. And if there's a question that you have that I can address right then, I will go ahead and address it. That's no problem. Also, if you have a comment that you think is important, feel free to share that in the chat. I think those are great ways that you can network and kind of have your own discussion about communication skills. Okay, so on to the next slide. Again, I wanted to thank Tampa Bay Library Consortium for inviting me today. And I want to reinforce that it's really important that you keep up with what's going on as far as training in your area. So be sure to go to the tblc.org website and click on the training and keep up to date with all of the different kinds of things that are being offered in your area. I think that's really important to see what's going on. Okay, so just a little bit more about me, and thank you, Vicki, for that great introduction. I really appreciate it. I have spent more than 30 years in the field. I got started as a work study student in the geography library at the University of South Carolina, and had before that even worked shelving children's books in the Union County Carnegie Public Library here in South Carolina. So I've been working in libraries for a long time. And I ended my career at about 12 or 13 years as the communications director of the South Carolina State Library. And that was a great position for me. As I will show you later on, I am an ENTJ, and that E starts out the Myers-Briggs type indicator as an extrovert. So I am more than happy for the spotlight to be on me. So I invariably managed to kind of get into the communications, marketing, and PR side of libraries. And that was a whole lot fun for me. I had been the communications director. I'm sorry, the continuing education coordinator for the South Carolina State Library, and had done a number of other things, including being the interim state librarian. And I did reference and interlibrary loans. So, also being webmaster, just a lot of different things that kept my career very interesting. But being the communications director was a lot of fun, because I think it's really important that we have to let people know what we do, how we do it, and what's available, or else they, may not know we exist. And I also really believed in the rule of three, which is that you, as a communications person, or as anyone who is communicating, a lot of times you have to meet someone 3 times before you remember their name. You have to see something promoted at least 3 times before you remember it. And you also have to communicate something to someone at least 3 times before they remember it. Now, of course, everyone is different. Like I talk about in the personality type section, everyone has different ways of learning, different ways of interpreting communications. But what it is that we should try to do is figure out how someone receives your message and how you send the message, so that you can make that communication go smoothly. So why effective communication skills are important? That means something different to everyone. And what I actually want to do right now in the meeting chat is, why do you think effective communication skills are important? And you can just use 1 or 2 words. You don't have to type a lot in the chat, but thinking about why effective communication skills are important. And just put that in chat. I see we've got saves time. Yes, exactly. If you're communicating effectively, it's going to save time. Clearly get across what you mean. It eliminates the guessing, avoids confusion, avoids conflict. Yes, Gina, that's very important, because if we don't know what's going on, we get stressed out. Creates good teamwork. Also, help patron make a book choice. Definitely. If you're doing that great reference interview and you're communicating effectively with the patron, you can help them better. So it boils down to not only good teamwork on the staff, but also good communicating with the patrons. Yes, and also to get a clear understanding. Definitely. Okay, great. Good responses. Thank you. Also, I have a little soapbox item that I think is very important, and it's another question that I'm going to ask you in just a second. But I personally think that every library needs to have someone, and if it's not full-time, at least part-time or part of their job, to handle PR and marketing and communications for their library or for their library system. Now, of course, larger systems are going to naturally have a PR, marketing, or communications person who works full-time, but a lot of small and medium-sized libraries, they don't have the ability to, in the budgeting, do that. But I definitely think it's important for it to be part of someone's job. So I'm going to ask one question right now is that, and this is just a yes or no response, and I'm not using polls or anything difficult. You can just put in the chat. Does your library or library system have a full-time PR, marketing, or communications person? So you can just say yes or no in the chat, and that way we can see who all is responding. So it looks like some more no's than yeses. And we've got a few yeses, so that's good. So now I would like to ask how many of your library systems, and this is again a yes or no question, how many of your libraries or library systems have someone who it's just part of their job to handle PR, marketing, and communications? Yes or no? All right, so I'm seeing a lot more yeses. So probably that's either the director or deputy director's job is to, at a medium or small size library, to handle that. I know a lot of times with academic libraries, you have to go through the communications department of the university or college, so that can sometimes be difficult. But I personally, and oh, we've got someone, it is not written as a job description, but we all take part. Okay, great. And if you're able to have someone coordinate that, that's even better. Because, you know, effective PR, marketing, and communications really is all of our jobs. But one of the things that I think is really important about having someone to handle PR, marketing, and communication is so that there's a consistent message from the library to patrons. I think that's really, really important. And being a leader in PR, marketing, and communications, that you have someone on your staff taking charge of that, that's really important. Okay, so what we'll cover within communication skills before we move on to personality types is we'll talk a little bit about knowing your audience and some active listening skills. We'll talk about the sender and receiver model. We'll also talk about avoiding conflict. And one of the phrases I love is being the calm in the chaos. I think that's important. Also, we'll talk just a little bit about small talk and personal versus professional conversation. And I will hit on multiculturalism, which I think is always important. A lot of times we, and especially you folks in Florida, you have to deal with a lot of people maybe who are retirees and maybe who are from a different region of the country who have different ways of communicating. And if you maybe hear that Massachusetts or New York accent when they're asking a question, that might trigger you to try to figure out how best to communicate with someone from a different region. So we'll chat a little bit about multiculturalism, and we'll also talk a little bit about having a difficult conversation and ways that you can make a difficult conversation go a little bit more smoothly. Okay, so knowing your audience. And this can, you know, go for meetings or for training sessions or whatever it is that you are having to do. If you have to be a presenter or if you have to help coordinate a meeting or a training session, these are some things that are good to know ahead of time. What I had done is I had emailed Vicki and asked about the attendees, and she graciously sent me a list of attendees so that I would know who would be attending, who had registered, and that I could see by your library names, that it was a mix of community college and university and public. So that's always a help to me so that I know who I'm talking to, so who will be attending. And also sometimes for, and one of the reasons why I asked you to put in your job titles is maybe what's your expertise? What area are you dealing with that can help me as a trainer know, where you're coming from, how you have to deal with patrons, how you, if you're a manager or director, how you have to deal with other staff. Also, knowing your audience, you have to really know what you're going to be responsible for. So if you're conducting a meeting, if you're facilitating a meeting, if you're facilitating a training session, how will you be able to determine what you have to do to make that effective communication go as smoothly as possible? So breaking it down to all those nuances and understanding what you'll be responsible for. For instance, before this session, Vicki and I logged in and we were discussing, who's doing what, and leaving time for Q&A. Would I be monitoring chat, asking different questions, all those kinds of things. So knowing what you'll be responsible for is important. And also, if you are having a specific meeting, knowing the agenda items ahead of time and how you can share your expertise in a certain area are very important for effective communication, especially during a meeting. Because, and like I had mentioned to Vicki, I have a different, completely different session on meeting facilitation skills, so that if you are responsible for putting on a meeting, what to know. But part of that is, what are the agenda items? How do you know what needs to be discussed during a meeting and who will do what? And if you're just attending a meeting and you're looking at the agenda ahead of time, thinking about how you could effectively communicate your area of expertise, so that other people could learn from you and maybe exchange that information. And also, what kinds of personality types will you be dealing with? Is this something that you're able to determine ahead of time? Maybe you know the people who are going into a meeting or a training session. It's really important to think about what personality types you might be dealing with. One of the things I always understood when I was doing face-to-face training, or even, now online training, is that there are usually 3 types of training session attendees. There's the learner, and the learner wants to be there to learn. They want to be there to understand what's going on. They want to learn a new skill, a new thought process. Then there's the vacationer. They've been told they need to attend a training session and they just say, well, I'll just sit back and relax the whole time. And, I'll just chill. This is time away from the desk. This is an hour and a half. I don't really have to do anything. Then you have the prisoner. They have been told they have to attend this training session. They may not have been told very nicely they have to attend the training session, and they're going to be there under duress. They have to sit there the whole time and they have to learn something. So knowing those different types of attendees to a meeting or to a training session, you as the person in charge, or even as the attendee, can understand more where people are coming from. And I think that's important to think about. Okay, so on to some active listening skills. I've got a few slides about discussing all of the stuff here. And you can see this is if you've ever attended any other kinds of communication skills training session, or if you have ever done any reading about communication skills, inevitably you have come across this little image, and you've got 2 individuals. You've got the sender and you've got the receiver. So the sender sends the message and the receiver receives the message. And then for confirmation, the receiver sends feedback to the sender. And that's basically all you need to know about this, this little diagram. However, what you can think about if you are doing any training or you're up in front of a group or you have to facilitate a meeting, that you can be the sender of the message and then there can be multiple receivers. So you could be talking to a whole group of receivers. And then occasionally you might, from one or two people, get some kind of feedback. And that can be different methods of feedback, which I'll talk about in a minute. So always kind of remember that sender receiver model. It's important to keep in the back of your mind when maybe you're thinking, is there a difficulty in communication going on? And it could be that you're not getting any feedback, and that's kind of weird. That's why I tend to ask a lot of questions in the meeting chat so that I'm getting feedback. I'm sending you the message, you all are the receivers, and then I'm getting feedback from you. For instance, can you hear my mic? Are you, are you paying attention? That kind of thing. So how do you listen in a casual versus a professional conversation? These tend to be very different kinds of listening skills and listening techniques. If you are talking with your partner at home or with a family member at home, you're going to listen to them differently than you probably are someone at work or a library patron. You might be more interested in one over the other. You might be more interested in what the patron has to say than what someone at home has to say. It just depends. But you have to think about how you listen to someone sending the message. If you're the receiver, do you listen differently? And think about having a conversation with someone at home or a family member, or a conversation with a colleague or a patron. How are those conversations different? And that's going to be different for everyone, but know that there is a difference. And think about how you respond and how the message is different and maybe how the feedback is different. From someone at home, you're going to understand, you've been around that person for a long time, you're going to understand the kind of ways they give you feedback. And you're also going to understand from their personality type how they like to receive the message. That's sometimes not the case, especially with a patron. You don't know them at all. So you have to think a little bit more critically when you're talking to someone who you don't know, or maybe someone at work who you don't know that well. And think about the different kinds of active listening skills you need to employ. There might be a language barrier. There might be an accent or a regional accent that you're not that familiar with. And so maybe you as the receiver need to ask for more clarification. You need to get a better understanding of where someone is coming from. And you can do that very nicely and apologetically. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble understanding you. Please say that again, and I'm more than happy to help you, but I'm not sure what that word means, however you need to do that. Also, think about how you ask questions in a meeting. Sometimes it is intimidating to ask questions in front of other people because maybe you think other people might think it's a stupid question or that you're stupid for asking it. My personality type, I've never had that issue. I don't really care if someone thinks I'm stupid or not. If there's something I want to know the answer to, I'll just ask, what does that acronym mean? I'm sorry, I've never heard of that, and just go on from there. But that's the way my personality type handles that. But there are many different personality types. And you need to, if you're the kind of person who needs to take a note and then ask that person individually later, that works best for you. But it all falls back into that message and feedback sender receiver model. Also, how do you handle interruptions? If you're in a meeting or a training session and someone is interrupting, how with your style of communication can you handle that? Again, I'm the kind of person who can easily say during a session, I'm sorry, I need to just ask for you to hold your questions till the end because it's a lot of interrupting for other attendees, and just be straightforward and direct. But you have to think about how would you handle that in a certain situation. And also think about how you can get input from people who may be uncomfortable in group situations. Um, telling people that they can contact you later if they don't feel comfortable asking in front of a group. Some people don't feel comfortable doing that. So just thinking through these different issues can be really helpful to make sure that you get the receiver, you get them the message you want them to hear, and that the receiver gives you the feedback you need for clarification, or if you need to just know that people are paying attention. And next, there's something about comprehending what others are saying. And like I mentioned, don't be afraid to ask for clarification, because not all the time the sender may be sending the right words. I remember way back in undergrad in calculus class, I had a graduate assistant from China teaching that class. And I remember his English was very difficult to understand. And I know I probably really bugged him asking for clarification all the time, but I couldn't understand him that well. And so I just, nicely, pleasantly asked for clarification, because I didn't know what the symbols meant, anything like that. So, but I did want to understand so that I could pass the class. Also, one of the active listening techniques you can do is use the phrase, "tell me more about." And that way, as the receiver, you're asking for clarification, but you're not saying, "I don't understand what you're saying." And you're not doing it in a negative tone, but you can show interest by saying, "Well, tell me more about that aspect of OCLC," or "tell me more about that training session." That way you're asking for more information without saying, "I need clarification. I have no idea what you're talking about." So there are all different kinds of cues you can get. There are verbal cues and nonverbal cues. So verbal cues, if you're the receiver and just saying a brief word of understanding or comprehension like yes, or you can even after the sender has sent the message, you can at the end say, "Well, what I heard you say was," and if that's not the same thing as what they said, then the sender can offer up clarification and saying, "Well, you may have heard this, but what I meant was this." And also, you can ask for follow-up or probing questions for clarification. If you don't feel comfortable saying, or "what I heard you say was," or "tell me more about," you can say whatever you think is most comfortable for the sender to understand that you're not understanding what they're saying, or repeating what they're saying, just so that you can give the sender the kind of feedback that they need to move forward. There are also a lot of nonverbal cues. A lot of times leaning forward can mean that, and sometimes it's hard to pick up on these if you're the one doing the presenting or talking, but if you're observing a room, then you can kind of see these nonverbal cues. So leaning forward a lot of times means that someone is interested. It can also mean their back hurts. So, it's very difficult to tell from nonverbal cues, because they can have so many different meanings if you're not actually stating what it is as the sender or receiver. But so leaning forward can mean, "Oh, I'm interested in this. I would like to know more." Also, direct eye contact. One of the things I tend to do as a Zoom presenter is look directly into the camera, because there is such a thing as Zoom fatigue. And if you don't have that direct eye contact, it can be very frustrating and actually psychologically draining on other people. But direct eye contact during a meeting or during a training session, if it's a one-on-one conversation and there's no direct eye contact, sometimes that can be disturbing to the sender of the information, because maybe they think that the receiver is not paying attention to what they have to say and may have to ask, "Did you hear me?" or "Did you understand?" Especially if the sender is a certain personality type and they kind of require that direct eye contact. Whereas sometimes the receiver may be a much different personality type, and don't feel comfortable making direct eye contact. And sometimes that can be cultural, sometimes that can be learned. It just depends. Also, facial responses like confusion. Sometimes people, depending on their personality, they can really make it easy for you to understand as the sender that they are confused, because they can look like, tilt their head to one side and scrunch up their face like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But for some people, maybe who are much less responsive with facial cues, you have no idea if they're receiving the message or not. Also, talking with your hands. One of the things I tend to do is talk with my hands a lot, and so I try to keep them down as much as possible because it can be a little bit distracting. But I am actually moving them under the camera. You can't see them. But these are all things that factor into some active listening techniques that, if you think very critically about and start to pay attention about, you will be able to understand more about how the person receiving your message is understanding you or not understanding you based on what kind of feedback they're giving you. And that can either be those verbal cues or the nonverbal cues. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was techniques for avoiding conflict in communication and learning how to be the calm in the chaos. I have a great story that happened years ago in a job interview. I was on the panel of 3 people who were interviewing a new staff member, and you ask the same types of questions over and over, and one of them was, how do you deal with a lot of projects going on at the same time, or a lot of issues that you're having to deal with at the same time? And this one person said, I like to think of myself as being the calm in the chaos. And that phrase really stuck with me, and I thought it was a great response. If you are, in fact, able to be calm in the chaos, and if you're not, I think it's an important technique to learn. There's also the dreaded whirlpool. Sometimes people, and I love this whirlpool analogy, sometimes people, and this can be staff members, this can be patrons, this can be family members, people at home. Sometimes the other people can be in a whirlpool, or you can be in a whirlpool. But what you have to understand, if someone else is in a whirlpool, and if they're reaching out to you, are they reaching out to pull you into the whirlpool, into their drama? Or are they reaching out to being pulled out of the whirlpool that they're currently in? So you have to kind of understand that about the person. Sometimes, we all know those people who love drama and they live from self-induced crisis to self-induced crisis. Do we want to be pulled into their whirlpool, or is there a case where they want to be pulled out of that whirlpool? So thinking about that in kinds of communication and being able to avoid conflict in those situations, I think is important. Also, just the simple act of lowering your voice and being calm and talking a little bit more slowly can help avoid conflict in communication in maybe a situation that might be a tense conversation. Also, I like to think of that song, and I never can remember the name of the group, but there was a line in the song that they're talking about acting with a sense of poise and rationality. If you know that song, put it in the chat. I can never remember it for some reason. But, thinking about acting with a sense of poise and rationality, I think is very important, because that is going to help you be that calm in the chaos and understand where someone else is coming through. Also, I tend to think of stoicism, I think is important to think about to avoid conflict. And what would Spock do? Because logic would dictate that ... whatever the issue is, and taking the emotion out of whatever the communication might be and understanding the logic behind it. Panic at the Disco. Thank you, Yvonne. I don't know why I never can remember that, but usually someone in the meeting session does. So yes, thank you. I write sins, not tragedies. So yes, thank you, Jessica. Um, but also, just remembering what would Spock do, what's logical. Let's take our emotion out of it and just talk about the issue at hand. And also knowing when to follow the chain of command. There are sometimes two personality types who are not going to get along no matter what. And do you have to contact a supervisor? Do you have to involve human resources? Knowing how to avoid that conflict is important. And also recognizing and handling microaggressions. I hadn't known what microaggressions were for a long time, but after doing a little research, I found this really great video. And when you get a copy of the PDF of the slides, you can certainly click on all these links I have for you. But there's it's about a 9 or 10-minute video by Dr. Daryl Wing Su, who talks about microaggressions in everyday life. And it's really helpful in understanding these microaggressions, but it's a term used for commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes toward stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. So it's really fascinating to understand how this works. And again, I think the important thing to understand about microaggressions is intentional or unintentional. Someone could have been raised a certain way, or they're of a different generation. And whatever it is they're saying, it could certainly be unintentional. That's why knowing personality types can be really helpful in understanding where someone is coming from and what their intent is. Now, some people, it is intentional. They are going to say some kind of derogatory or negative attitude towards someone. But understanding that there is a difference in these microaggressions can be helpful in understanding how you as a communicator can get your point across. And I'm the kind of person you'll see in the personality types area. If there's a microaggression going on in a meeting, I'm going to call someone out on it. I'm going to say, I don't think this is the right setting for us to have that conversation. And I really don't appreciate what you're saying to me right now. So let's have a conversation about that later and be done with it and move on, because that's not the intent of the meeting or the training session. So again, I wanted to mention about small talk. There are some cultures who avoid small talk, and there's a great little video from the BBC about how the Swedes in Sweden survive without small talk. It's really fascinating to understand how different cultures handle small talk. And by understanding that, you can know in a setting with your colleagues, if someone is from a different country or someone has been raised a certain way or communicates differently, do they avoid small talk? Or do some people really like small talk? I personally am one of those kinds of people because I'm an extrovert. I like small talk because I find at the beginning of a meeting or beginning of a training session, it can help you assess personality types in the room, and it can also allow you to make connections. That's another one of the reasons why I had you do a little virtual networking at the beginning, so you could see where other people are from in different library systems, and maybe someone you can reach out to later if you have a question, because I think it's great to make those kind of connections. It can also allow you and others to open up without having to do an icebreaker. Some people really hate icebreakers. I was actually at a retreat a couple of years ago with a friend who's very much an introvert, and we were getting ready to go around and talk about different projects we were working on. And he leaned over and whispered to me, "Oh, just shoot me." Whereas I want to get up in the middle of the circle and start telling everyone all about the different projects I'm working on. So, it just depends on personality type, how you respond to that. Also, don't be afraid to open up with small talk, but I think it's important to have limits. You can be personal, yet very professional at the same time, but also knowing what to say and what not to say is and to be appropriate in the conversation. There are some people who never really learned that, and you have to think critically about what you're opening up about. Also, I think it's important to learn about multicultural communication, because we are all different, and some people, um, have the ability to understand someone's culture because they've experienced it, or have the ability to be sensitive to other people. So thinking about multicultural communication is important. And then having difficult conversations. If you're a supervisor, it's really important to remember that you're the one in charge. And sometimes a subordinate or someone who you are supervising thinks they're in charge. You have to let them know up front, no, we need to stop right now. I need to remind you that I'm in charge of this conversation and you're not in charge of this conversation. And you can just say that. You can say it, you can be nice, but you can also be firm and confident about that. Also, if you have to have a difficult conversation with someone, um, be sure that everything is documented. Document, document, document. Get as much as you can in writing before and after those difficult conversations. And you can also be very straightforward and say up front, look, I'm going to be straightforward about this. This is the situation. This is how I think we need to handle it. But I also need to get your input on how you think it's best for you to deal with this situation. And take notes. Understand what the kind of conversation needs to be, but be comfortable by knowing, especially if you're the supervisor, knowing that you're in charge of the situation. Um, and other things that I think is important to know about is that remember that others may be fighting a battle you know nothing about. So someone at home might be dealing with a sick relative or a difficult situation with their partner or housemate or roommates, whatever the situation might be, you may not be privy to that. That's why it's important to, you be nice and firm and confident, but understand that there might be something else going on. I remember having a staff member I supervised come into my office and was really agitated about a project she was working on. And I thought to myself, this is uncharacteristic. And I said, is everything okay at home? If there's anything you want to talk about, I'm more than happy to listen. And she said, well, yes. And her husband had lost his job and it was weighing on her. And I could tell something was going on. And she felt comfortable mentioning that to me. And I felt comfortable to receive that information and understand where she was coming from. And that made our future communications much better because I could understand I needed to handle her with care and concern because I knew she was going through a difficult time at home. So always remember that others may be fighting a battle you know nothing about. So networking skills, online versus in person is very different. Understand that there are a lot of differences here. I think using LinkedIn is important. If you do not have a LinkedIn account, I highly recommend as your homework assignment is to set up a LinkedIn account, understand it, especially if you're looking for other jobs or other kinds of career opportunities, or you just want to be more in the know, or you're kind of tired of social media and want to be more professional about social media, but still be in groups and learn from things that are going on out there. Keeping up is really important. And so that's why I think using LinkedIn is really a good option. Also, don't be afraid to be the first to greet someone in a group, even if it's not your personality type. Try to do it and see how it feels. It may not work for you, and you can say, well, I've tried it and I don't like it, so I'm not going to do that again. I think this is a great little quote, and this is from apa.org, and I have the link under the picture there for you. And this is Networking with Ease by Dr. Jennifer M. Bonds-Rack. And this quote, this definition, helped me understand networking a little bit better as far as from a communication standpoint, that networking is about forging long-term reciprocal relationships that can help you and your colleagues do your jobs better. And I think that is important to remember because we hopefully all want to do our jobs better. We want to help our patrons as best we can. We want to work well with our colleagues as best we can. So understanding a little bit more about people you work with, or understanding a little bit more about what the patrons' needs are, will help you do your job better. And I want to talk briefly about Zoom fatigue and communication. Communicating in person versus online are very, very different things. Like I mentioned before, there are variations in eye contact. That's why I tend to be looking directly at the camera so that you can kind of get a sense or feeling that I'm looking directly at you. Also, there's an inability on Zoom to pick up on nonverbal cues. For instance, I can't see anyone else right now, so I can't see if someone is looking out the window and they're completely bored. That's why I have to, at the beginning especially, ask different questions and kind of get questions throughout so that I can tell what it is you're taking from the session. Also, what does it say if you're in a meeting and you turn off your camera? If you're doing the communication, if you're the sender of the information or the message, what does it say if someone you notice maybe turns off their camera or mutes themselves? You know that they're probably not paying attention to what it is you're saying. Also, there was a great story about during quarantine and when so many students were having to use Zoom from home, there was a fifth grader, and a teacher finally figured this out, but there was a fifth grader in her classes who she thought was having a really difficult time with internet access. But what he was doing is he was going at the beginning of each session, changing his name to the word reconnecting ... so that he didn't have to be there, which I actually think is pretty smart. But then the way she figured it out one time is that he misspelled the word reconnecting. So, the computer's not likely to do that, but a fifth grader, changing his name to reconnecting, I think is pretty clever, but just a little funny thing that has happened. Also, there's a University of Georgia newsletter story that's called "Cameras Not Meetings Cause Zoom Fatigue." And it says, "I'm guessing extroverts get less fatigued in general by the camera, so their performance isn't going to suffer because they're not going to feel that fatigue." And a lot of times that's important. I tend to feel as a trainer and as a library consultant, I really get energized by doing these training sessions because I'm an extrovert, I'm an ENTJ. And so that's the kind of thing that's very different for all different kinds of people. But just understand that Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and it really does relate to that inability to make eye contact and also to feel someone's energy if you're in the same meeting room, because we all have a different kind of energy level that we bring to things. One of the things I think is important about names, and I've had difficulty with this all of my life, is that a lot of people really like their names and they want to hear their name, and they want to know that you know their name. So really concentrating and remembering and repeating someone's first name is important. And again, the rule of three, I usually have to meet someone or see someone's name at least 3 times before it starts to really take. And a lot of times in social situations or professional situations, if you know someone and you have to introduce them, this can be really daunting for some people. For me, I've never had a problem with it because of my personality type. If I've forgotten someone's name, I have forgotten someone's name. And, I just have apologized and said, "I am so sorry, your name escapes me right at the moment," and hopefully they will say it. But, to be able to introduce people, a lot of times you can kind of pick up on nonverbal cues or verbal cues from someone in a social or professional situation who has forgotten your name and they're talking with someone else. And that's your cue to introduce yourself to that other person, to kind of get that the person who you may know or who has forgotten your name, kind of let them off the hook and just go ahead and introduce yourself to the other person. That's why name tags are really important and really helpful, especially name tags that have a really big font of the first name. So if you ever put on a conference or a meeting and you have to have name tags or name tents, it's important that those can be seen. So understanding individual differences, try not to generalize. Everyone has their own unique experience, background, and understanding of their surroundings and communities. So that's why it's important not to generalize. Everyone in a certain group is all going to believe or be the same way. Because they're not, especially when it comes to communicating. And don't assume you know what others are going through. Like I said, someone at home might be going through something, and your communication with them is going to be different because they're maybe not able to pay attention to you as they would because of other things going on. Also, you can ask questions, but you can ask if you can ask them first. You can say, is it okay if I ask you about such and such? And they could certainly say no. A lot of times people are going to say, yeah, that's fine. But you can always offer your own experience. And that will sometimes make people feel more able to, be open and honest about everything. And also trying to stay positive is really important. Okay, so I want to kind of move into the direction of personality types, and kind of in that, I want to mention the big five and intercultural competency. There, I think it was in the 70s, the big five popped up in psychology and understanding people's personality traits. And these five were neuroticism, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness. And it's always good to try to understand someone's cultural background and understand that not one size fits all. So again, you may think you can communicate well with someone, but they, as the receiver, might not be receiving the same message as you're putting out. Also, if you're having to interact with someone from another country or another culture, just go to Google and type in, how to interact with someone from Ghana. Or if you have someone you're going to be in a meeting with from another country, how to interact with someone from France. You can just Google that and you actually get a lot of great information. You can also ask anyone, the individual, about their communication preference, but you have to be open to that change. So if you're going to be asking, well, how would you like to receive this information? How would you like this conversation to go? That will sometimes clear the air, and you can figure out from there how to move forward. And then cultural competence, loosely defined as the ability to understand, appreciate, and interact with people from cultures or belief systems different from one's own. And this has been a key aspect of psychological thinking and practice for some 50 years. Again, there's a link to cultural competence from the American Psychology Association there in the handouts that you can look at later. And it's important to understand that those differences exist, to think critically about, do you need to learn more about that individual you're trying to communicate with? Do you need to not make assumptions about where that person is from and what they understand or believe? Also, pronouns. This is sometimes difficult for people. And I think it's important to just, whatever someone's pronouns are, if they want to, tell you what they are, just go ahead and use their preferred pronouns, accept it, and move on. That's the easiest way to deal with that. Understand there are differences in race and ethnicity, and sex and gender, and masculine versus feminine. And it's important to, during communication, understand that those stereotypes are just that. They're just stereotypes. Each individual is going to handle the sender-receiver model of communication differently. And you just have to get to know someone to be able to communicate with them effectively. Also, approach others with humility and kindness. That's the most important thing. Okay, so moving on to personality types. I do have a homework assignment for you. You can do it or not. It's left up to you if it's something that you're interested in. But if you go to www.16personalities.com and take the test and set up your profile, it's a really great way to understand your personality type and how you can effectively communicate with other people. And it also will tell you about how you like to receive information. It's free, and I do not work for 16personalities.com at all. They have a free version and a pay version. I use the free version. I think it's a great MBTI style test to understand your personality type. You can also learn as little or as much as you want. And you can also take the test with your work team or colleagues and then discuss the results. So one of the things you could do with your work team is you could all take the 16 personalities, and then at your next department meeting or team meeting or staff meeting, you can kind of group yourselves into the different personality types and discuss the basics of those personality types so that you can understand how best to communicate with one another. And I'm going to take a sip of tea. So I'm going to go through these next slides and talk about the different categories. So there are 16 personality types. So there are 4 main categories, and in that there are 4 subcategories. So first we have the analysts. And as I'm talking about these, I want you to think of people you work with and think of where maybe they fall into this category and maybe where you yourself fall into a category. So first, under the analysts, we have the architect. They're imaginative and strategic thinkers with a plan for everyone. Then you have the logician. I always have to say that slowly because it's an odd word, but it sounds like magician, but logician. Innovative inventors with an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. Commander, bold, imaginative, strong-willed leaders, always finding a way or making one. And debater, smart and curious thinkers who cannot resist an intellectual challenge. Then you have the diplomats. An advocate is quiet and mystical, yet very inspiring and tireless. Mediator, poetic, kind, altruistic. Protagonist, charismatic and inspiring. And then the campaigner, enthusiastic, creative, and sociable free spirits. Then you have the sentinels. The logistician, practical and fact-minded individual, and then the defender, very dedicated and warm protectors. The executive, excellent administrators, unsurpassed at managing things, and the consul, extraordinarily caring, social, and popular people. Then we have the explorers, the virtuoso, bold and practical experimenters, the adventurer, flexible and charming artists, entrepreneur, smart, energetic, and very perceptive, and the entertainer, spontaneous, energetic, and enthusiastic. Then you might have noticed an A and a T at the end of those, and the assertive personality, the A stands for assertive, calm in the storm. These are also the calm in the chaos. A lot of people with the assertive identity say they feel confident facing day-to-day difficulties. And then you have the T, which is the turbulent personality. And they're the ones who are fed by stress. So turbulent individuals are success-driven, perfectionistic, and eager to improve. So as an example, I want to kind of talk you through my personality type. So my personality type is commander. I'm an ENTJ, and the ENTJ, that's the extroversion, the intuition, the thinking, and the judging. And then the A at the end is either the assertive or the turbulent. So you can see when you do this, this will give you a percentage on all of the different kinds of factors you're learning about. So I'm 66% into the extroversion, 73% into the intuitive, 57% thinking versus feeling, and then 76% judging versus prospecting, and then 75% assertive versus the turbulent. So after you take the test, you'll get an email with all the information about your personality type. Again, you can read as much or as little as you want. But I think that the strengths and weaknesses help you understand how your type affects communication and how others see you. So what this says about me, I'm the commander, the ENTJ, that I tend to come in dynamically to a conversation, and I tend not to listen that well. That's one of the things I've been always trying to work on, is how I listen to people, because I tend to be thinking while they're talking. So I have to understand that about myself and understand how that fits in with the sender-receiver model. Again, it will break down your personality type by mind, energy, nature, tactics, and identity. So you can see under my nature one, that's where I come closest to the 50% mark, whereas the others I tend to be much higher in. So by knowing this about me, you could understand where we would stand during a conversation and how I would take in the information that you're imparting, and how that would affect our communication. And then also you get specifics about all different categories. For instance, under energy, this trait shows how we direct our mental energy, and you can see I'm 73% intuitive instead of being observant. So I mostly go on intuition, and that can help me understand how I need to concentrate more, or how I need to maybe observe a little better what's going on. And then you also get an email sample. You get free emails about your personality traits. And this helps you think more about how people view you, and maybe how they understand or don't understand what it is you're trying to communicate. But it helps you better understand yourself and what kind of behaviors you have in certain situations. And it helps you to know how to react to problems and issues, and really helps you maybe work a little bit better with your colleagues. You also get email updates. I had recently received this email from 16 personalities that was geared towards my specific type, but also with challenges. So this says, while certainty can equate to opportunity for some analysts, they are not without their challenges in dealing with the unknown. So for instance, my trait, I like to figure things out for myself. I enjoy influencing the actions of others. I prefer to give rather than take orders. So this helps me understand how I would communicate and how people would either receive the information or maybe not understand something I'm saying. Also, it'll give you opportunities. So it says here, what I should be doing is think of uncertainty as an opportunity to exercise my problem-solving skills, and how I can embrace or enhance my ability to move quickly past any stressful events. I tend to also be the calm in the chaos. I know that during some meetings in the past, if there has been some agitation, that's where I kind of step up and start to speak a little bit more slowly and start to ask for clarification, so that I can kind of mediate that situation. Also, this says I need to focus on what I can do in uncertain situations, such as researching different options or relevant data, rather than dwelling on what is beyond my control. So a lot of good feedback. And it's really kind of scary how, when you respond to all the questions in the test, the kind of response you get, because it's like, wow, that is me, which I think is helpful. So there are a lot of other personality type tools. There's the Hexaco, which I'm going to highlight in just a minute. There's the DISC, of course, MBTI, which is the 16 personalities. There's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, Truity, High Five, the Berkman method. There's all different kinds of things out there, and whatever works well for you or for your team is what you should use. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. You just have to figure out how you want to deal with that. I did want to mention the Hexaco personality inventory. This is one I found very interesting, and I took it a little while back, and the responses are much more academic in nature, and your score tends to be much more statistically influenced and displayed. So it's interesting to see what percentages you are falling on different sides of the median score at the 50th percentile. And you can see here on, this is my response, and this is just at the first one, the honesty, humility section. And by the way, the Hexaco personality inventory took those 5 big areas of personality, but added on the honesty dash humility. So this one is 6 instead of 5 dimensions of personality. And actually, if you're in an academic setting, it might be more inclined for you to use the Hexaco personality inventory because of its academic bent. It was started in Canada by 2 professors. I forget which university offhand, but it was around the year 2000. So they took those big 5 areas and added the honesty, humility, and then the others stand for emotionality, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. And this is a nice little chart I found that goes through the different areas. So honesty, humility, tendencies to be fair and genuine, emotionality, tendencies associated with the kin altruism, such as empathetic concern, extroversion, tendency to become engaged in social endeavors, agreeableness, forgiving, tolerant, and cooperative, conscientiousness, engaged in task-related endeavors, and then openness, tendencies to become engaged in idea-related endeavors, such as learning and imagining and thinking. So you can get a different sense of where this is going. And there's a really great book. It's a very small book. In fact, I have my copy right here. It's not big at all. Has a lot of really good examples of different personality types, but I love the subtitle on this: Why Some People Are Manipulative, Self-Entitled, Materialistic, and Exploitive, and Why It Matters for Everyone. So really good, quick read that you can learn more about the Hexaco test. Also, there's a good link here. This talks about the 23 best personality tests and it ranks them. So I recommend when you get the PDF that you can go and learn more here. And I also found this really good article in Inc. At Inc.com, and it explains the 6 types of workers. So this one is called The Working Future, More Human, Not Less. It's time to change how we think about work. This is something Bain and Company did. And it was an article by Jessica Stillman, and these are the 6 types of workers. And again, when I say these, think of people you work with and think about yourself. So first you have the operators, they're team players, and they can also be not proactive and easily disengaged. Then you have the givers, they're selfless and they help build trust, but they're sometimes impractical or naive. Then third, you have the artisans, they're well positioned to solve complex challenges, but they can also be aloof and lose sight of bigger objectives. Then you have the explorers. They will enthusiastically throw themselves at whatever task is required, but they can also lack conviction. And then you have the strivers. They are disciplined and transparent, but they can their competitiveness can degrade trust and camaraderie. And lastly, the pioneers. They have infectious energy that can bring about lasting change, but they can also be uncompromising and imperious. Then communication and meeting dynamics. I have a whole nother session on meeting dynamics. It's a lot of things to think about when it's communicating during a meeting. There can be a lot of other things going on, like the table size, the light, the windows. Are the chairs comfortable? Are people miserable? Is the display or technology not working? And you also have to think about the sender-receiver model, in that who is setting the tone of the meeting. is if it's something that there's negative energy at the beginning of a meeting, then the communication is going to be negative. So all of that you have to think about. Has the technology been set up ahead of time? Again, the body language I mentioned, sitting forward, leaning back, are people engaged? Has the agenda been sent out at least 24 hours in advance so people know what they're getting into? They can prepare mentally about how they're going to communicate during a meeting. And also, is there someone to take minutes and to take notes that can shed light on the communication as far as how is follow-up going to be handled? So all of those things are important with communication during a meeting. Then, of course, you have to deal with the conversational narcissist. I think a lot of times we can think to meetings that there's been someone who has dominated the meeting. This Dr. Ramani in MedCircle does a great video. The link is on this page. So when you get the PDF, you can go there and learn about this 9 signs of conversational narcissism. This is something that is really fascinating to me because I've been in meetings where there has been a conversational narcissist, and it's really interesting to see how they can shut down when the conversation has moved away from them and is something they're not interested in, but then also how they can bring it back to something they're interested in and then take that conversation over again. And there are a lot of different ways to deal with them in a meeting. You can use a time approach so that only specific people have a specific amount of time to respond to questions. Also using a very neutral staff member as a meeting monitor. And ultimately, if you do have a conversational narcissist who is really ruining meetings or training sessions, you really ultimately need to have a conversation with the human resources person or their supervisor and document what's going on and say, you know, we need to have some kind of conclusion because this person is interrupting the flow of conversation and the flow of communication, and people aren't able to concentrate in meetings or in training sessions. Okay, so as we're wrapping up, I would like to give you additional resources that I think are really important. Some of these may be in your library collections. Some of these you may be able to get through interlibrary loan, or there may be something that you want to add to your library's collection. The first one is Diffusing the Angry Patron. That's an ALA Editions book by Rubin. Really good book, goes into a lot of details about how to be that calm in the chaos that I mentioned. Also, Working in a Multicultural World. This isn't anything specifically for libraries. It's more of just a general kind of thing, but things to think about as far as how to develop an intercultural competence, how to understand people from other cultures, people from other regions in the United States, and how to figure out the best way based on your communication style to be able to communicate with those others. And then Effective Difficult Conversations, a step-by-step guide. This is ALA Editions, and it is something that can help you understand what you need to do when you have to have those difficult conversations, but how you can do them effectively. Also, there's a great communication-related article that talks about stop saying I'm sorry at work. I think it's interesting, a lot of gender-specific information because a lot of females tend to apologize a lot more than males. And this article talks about how to deal with that and how to try to get yourself out of the habit if you're in the habit of saying, I'm sorry, da 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 da, or constantly apologizing for something over which you need not to apologize. So you can take a look at that. Also, there's a really good podcast series, and it's the Smart Communications podcast. And I haven't listened to every single one, but they do have a number of ones that are on specific categories and specific subjects within communications. And it's all from a nonprofit standpoint. So I think it's has a lot of insights and tips that you can think more about strategic communications. And I see we're at 16 minutes after 11. So I would like to give you all some time before we wrap up to post any questions in the chat. One of the things I do think is important to offer to you is if you have a question that you don't feel as though you can ask in chat, my email is right there. You can certainly email me and I will get back in touch with you in a day or two, sometimes even quicker. But my contact information is curtisrogersconsulting@gmail.com, and you can learn more about the sessions I give at my website at curtisrogersconsulting.com. So does anybody have any questions? I will go ahead and open it up for that. And if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that if you can. I'm not sure how the session is set up, but if you'd like to ask it verbally, you can, or if you want to type it into the chat, you're welcome to. And you're welcome. Hopefully, information has been helpful for you. I know it's a lot of information to take in, so you might not have a question right now, but if you have a question later on, you've certainly got my email address. And I definitely appreciate everyone attending today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Vicky.